Howdy, this is Jim Rutt. The following is a continuation of my podcast with George Mason University economist and author Robin Hanson. Now let's go on to another one, politics.
People are especially sensitive about politics, especially emotional, and they've got a lot invested in this. Well, actually, some people are. So in all the different 10 areas we discuss, people vary a lot about how central those things are to their identity. So for many of you, medicine is not central to your identity, and you were fine with what I just said in the last few minutes. And for others of you, medicine was central to your identity, and you're very skeptical. It's really important to you to believe that medicine is effective. Similarly, in politics, some of you don't care much about politics. You're kind of cynical or skeptical about it. And what I'm about to say will sound fine. And others of you will be much more skeptical because politics is really important to you. So the usual story about politics is that you get involved with politics, you read about it, you talk about it because you are helping. You are a Dudley Do-Right. You are making contributions to your society by thinking carefully about the better political positions, the better politicians, et cetera, and then making good choices that will benefit all of us. Good for you. That's the usual story people want to give to explain their political behavior. And that story just doesn't fit with a lot of details about people's political behavior. For one thing, you are just way too emotional and very uninformed about most political opinions you have. People seem quite free to have political opinions they haven't researched much at all, and they seem very confident of them, even though these things are usually pretty complicated. And there's a number of other puzzles that just don't fit with the usual story. So if, for example, you really cared about producing good political outcomes, you would want, say, to pick politicians who were good operatives, who knew how to work the machine behind the scenes. They could craft bills and negotiate deals. And you'd want somebody who was good at all of that. And you wouldn't care so much about what public positions they took. And you wouldn't necessarily want them to take extreme positions that would limit their ability to make deals. You'd want them to be good at making deals. But in fact, people seem to care mostly about the positions politicians take, and they don't care much about whether they're good at actually making things happen. They want politicians who share their positions. And of course, politicians are happy to supply that, but it calls into question the idea that what you really want to do is produce more effective policy. And there's a number of other puzzles we go into. We'd say the better explanation here is that what you want to do is show your support for your political allies. There's your team, and you want to say, yay, us team, and I'm with you. And most of what people do actually does a pretty good job with that. People are very effective at that. And that's, in some sense, much more plausible about something you would actually care about, in the sense that the people around you do look at you and interpret you in terms of a political lens. They ask, whose side are you on and are you loyal? And that affects whether they want to relate to you. So people seem to care a lot about whether their spouses and lovers share their political views, about whether people at school do, whether people on the job do. This matters a lot to people, and it's a strong selection effect on people, whether they, have the political views that the people around them like. So that's all very plausible, but of course it means that our political system isn't designed or necessarily doing a very good job of producing good policies. It's allowing a lot of people to take sides and to show loyalty to their sides.
Now, this is an area I've done a little bit of thinking in, and I would say call my perspective a more institutional one, and that the behaviors you see, in fact, in my own writings on this, I just refer to the two teams as Team Red and Team Blue to make them seem as much like football teams as anything else, because that's certainly how the behaviors come about. My argument, though, is that isn't necessarily driven by human nature or culture, but rather by the institutional design of our political system. In the case of the United States, we have one of the strongest set of constitutional and traditional settings to produce a two-team dynamic. We have a single-member election districts with first past the post, usually plurality wins. And then we also have a congressional system where control is by one party, typically in one house, which argues strongly for very strong coalitions or very strong parties to win a majority so that they can control the House of Congress. And I look at that, and I've looked at another institutional design, which I think could address that and produce a very different result, which is liquid democracy, also known as delegative democracy, where there aren't any teams. Essentially, each voter allocates their vote to people who represent them. And in my version of liquid democracy, that vote is divided up into something like 25 issue areas like defense and economy, healthcare, education. And so let's say I'm merry voter, and I give my education vote to my sister, who's a teacher, and to my uncle, who's a retired lieutenant for defense, a retired lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, et cetera. And I've taken my vote and pushed it to people who probably are more knowledgeable than I am in the domain. And nowhere does that get aggregated into a team. Rather, each issue that gets floated by a person, an initiation of legislations, gets voted on by these proxies without any intermediation. And so we don't have the institutional dynamic that we see in our system.
So in our book, in all of these areas, we are first just trying to look at broad averages of human behavior across a wide range of space and times. So, for example, in medicine, there are some different things about the United States versus the rest of the world, but we're not focused on that. We're not trying to explain why is the United States different. We're trying to say why is medicine everywhere at all times has certain common characteristics. So I'd say the same about politics. We're mainly trying to look at the common features of politics across a wide range of contexts. And for example, in your church, in your firm, in your family, there is politics. We talk about office politics, for example. And these other political arenas have a lot of the similar sorts of features and effects. And so it's less trying to focus on the United States today in the year 2019, or even all democracies. There's going to be variations based on institutions, as you say, and lots of other context. But our first priority is just try to look at the very basic overall patterns. And so we're usually immersed in a variety of context, and our politics varies by context, and we often try to some degree to integrate them, but at a lower cost. So for example, in your firm, there's going to be different factions, and you'll be aligned with some faction. And then in a meeting, you might try to promote your faction in that meeting, and that would be politics. Often the main thing you're trying to do is make sure other people in your faction know that you are still with them and supporting their faction. Now, in many firms, the main division is between, the top and the bottom. And then you might be trying to say, I'm not rebelling against the top. I'm with the top. I'm loyal. And that would be the main thing you were trying to show. It'll be less one faction against another than there's the dominant powers, and you're trying to show your submission to them. And so, similarly in your church, there might be factions, or there might be one dominant coalition in your family. But we still have politics in all these contexts, in the sense that we take positions, we express opinions on what would be good policies, who should be in charge. And again, in a lot of these contexts, we seem much more interested in the public appearance of being loyal to some sides than we care about actually making good choices.
That makes a lot of sense. Anything else you want to add about the book before we move on to our last topic?
Well, the key message of our book for people who want to do institution design or improving the world is to say the problem is a little harder than you might have thought, but there's a better prospect that if you solve this harder problem, you'll actually get some traction. So today, for example, if you try to solve the education problem in the form of how can we get more students to learn more material faster, you'll find that we actually have a lot of solutions and we can identify them, but nobody cares. But if school is really about showing that you are smart and conscientious and conformist and things like that, then you might have a better chance if you found a solution that let people show those things more effectively, then they would be actually interested, although they're going to want to continue to pretend to want to show that they're learning the material. So because we are hypocritical, because in each of these areas, we have one thing we say we're trying to do and another thing we actually are trying to do, reforms will also have to be hypocritical in that they will have to continue to let us pretend that we are trying to achieve the thing we are pretending to achieve, but actually give us more of the things we really want so that we will actually be interested in adopting them. So that's the different perspective that I'm hoping to pass on to social scientists and policymakers from my lifetime of experience, which is if you reform the question that way, you'll have a better chance of actually producing reforms that people want.
Okay, that makes a heck of a lot of sense, actually, though it does bring something pretty close to cynicism into the design of our institutions. The fact that there's a nominal reason, learn something, and then there's a real reason, show that you're smart, right?
Right, and it makes a plausible reason why you can't be fully honest about why you are proposing something. And so it means that you can easily, if other people are doing this, you can accuse them of hypocrisy, which is a terrible accusation usually, and people will try to deny it. And they can accuse you of hypocrisy because if this is what you're doing, you actually are being hypocritical in some sense because ordinary people are hypocritical and you're trying to accommodate them.
Unfortunately, that seems to give rise to a defense mechanism within the system for inefficiency, right? If to actually address the reality immediately produces a reaction from the other side of hypocrisy, it then becomes difficult to nudge the system towards reality.
So the first thing to realize is all of these different systems are chock full of enormous waste. From the point of view of the thing we say we're trying to achieve, there's a vast potential for doing better and a vast unacknowledged and unused potential. So it's far easier to figure out how to produce policies that would make things better than it is to get people to be interested in adopting them. So the more fundamental problem in the world isn't how can we have a better world, but is how can we make anybody care about having a better world?
Yeah, it seems to be the split is the reality of what they say they want is different from how they'll actually behave. And unfortunately, if you try to move the system towards how they'll actually behave, you're immediately subject to the charge of hypocrisy because you have deviated from the stated social norm.
Which is what happens if you admit your actual reason for making those proposals.
So, and then you have to have another level of strategy, right? Which is here's the reason, but we have here's the proposal, but here's the reason, which isn't the real reason, right?
Right now, most people who are involved in politics and policy and social science know that, in fact, this is what actually typically happens. Most people who are making policy proposals do have hidden agendas and aren't willing to be fully honest about why they're making those proposals. They know that's true about pretty much everybody, and which they know that it's true about the other side. They focus on the other side, and they know that those other people are hypocrites, which all the more emboldens them to be outraged and indignant about the other side.
Well, it's always good to know how a system works, but I must say I don't take a tremendous amount of optimism about our current political process away from this knowledge. So,
well, but what it means is enormous potential is there for improvement. If the system was really well optimized, it would mean we couldn't do much better. When the system is really broken, it means there's huge potential for improvement.
That is true. One of the best jobs I ever took was a really messed up company. People said, "Why'd you do that?" And I said, "It's actually a lot easier to fix a messed up company than it is to build a good one."
Or to improve a good one.
Or to improve a good one.